What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and that actually leads to results? My name is Miriam Hatness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the mission to find out what makes workshops work. And today with me on the show is Holger Nauheimer. He has been the host of the Berlin Change Days for the last 11 years. It's a big conference in Germany where facilitators and change makers come together. And I was curious to learn from him what it takes to host and facilitate facilitators. And by the way, if you don't have a pen and paper at hand because you're commuting or you're running or you're on the go, don't worry. Just visit workshops.work, search for episode 46, and download my notes that I prepared for you. But now, first of all, enjoy the show and stay tuned. Hello, Holger.
Hey, Miriam.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks for inviting me and thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward.
I met and saw you at the recent Berlin Change Days. Right. This huge conference for change makers and facilitators who would come to Berlin from all over the world, literally, just to participate in your event that you've been hosting for the last 11 years?
That's right. Yeah, 11 years.
Yes. And I got so curious about the topic of hosting and facilitating facilitators. So I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, me too. I'm not quite sure whether I'm an expert on facilitating facilitators. I mean, I just do it, but maybe I have something to say about it if you ask the right questions. So let's see what comes out at the end.
I will do my very best, and I totally trust your expertise in that matter after 11 years. But before getting into that, I would first of all be curious to learn from you your story. And when did you actually start calling yourself a facilitator?
That's an interesting question. Well, first of all, for a long time, I didn't call myself a facilitator, but a moderator. Because when I started, and that's about 25 years ago, actually, I can give you the exact date, not the exact date, but the month. It was February 1994 when I started to call myself a moderator, because at that time, in German organizations for which I worked, the word moderator was more en vogue, and nobody talked about facilitators at that time. But let's stay with that because it basically meant the same. So a long answer to a short question, I started to call myself a moderator or facilitator from February 1994 onwards. And you're curious why? You're curious why, obviously.
Yes, of course.
Because I had never thought of becoming a facilitator before, and suddenly somebody, a consulting company who had a big contract for the German Ministry of Agriculture to support the agriculture in Kazakhstan, mind you, it was 1994. So they had a contract with a lot of experts. And they asked me, for whatever reason, I still don't understand nowadays, they asked me whether I would be able to facilitate a workshop. Probably it was because I had some experience in the East at that time. So because I needed jobs and I was curious and I had watched like 3 or 4 other facilitators before, not more, I said yes. So I was a facilitator.
Interesting. And so you expressed that you have some thoughts of why they might have asked you. And I wonder, what do you think is it that clients or someone is looking for in terms of characteristics or skills or mindset when they are hiring a facilitator? So what does it take to be a good facilitator?
Well, you asked 2 questions. So I think the client at that time, they didn't know me. They just had my CV. And I think they had no idea what a facilitator means. It's quite interesting to think about that. I think clients differ a lot. Many clients I know who hire a facilitator want to get things done. For example, they have to work on a new strategy and they need somebody who they think can help them to straighten their thoughts, things like that. But then there are other clients who needs somebody who is able to dive deep into a conflict and help them to solve things. So I don't think there is one certain view of clients, and many clients don't have much experience with facilitators, so some of them have no idea what they are actually looking for, and some have. Obviously, some have.
Yeah. But well, this is not the topic of our conversation. Anyway, I had a conversation on that with Kirsty Lewis. I was just curious. So what does facilitation mean to you? And maybe also in contrast to moderation, because in German language, this might be the same because we don't have a proper word for facilitation. But
yeah,
what is it for you?
I don't want to insist too much on the difference between moderation and facilitation. I know my colleague Jutta Weimar, with who I work together quite a lot, she has some specific ideas on that. I think for me, it's just an old, outdated word. I do the same I did 25 years ago, or let's say I don't do exactly the same because I evolved and I learned a lot. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit later. What's my foundations of my work? But so I don't want to insist on the word. But coming back to your main question is, what is facilitation? I usually think about the origin of the word, and I speak a little bit of Spanish, and in Spanish, fácil means easy. So I would say I'm the person who makes things easy or fluid or so. So I help people to go through processes, whatever process this is, I'm there for to make the process easy.
Nice. If you had to give yourself a hashtag, so to summarize your skill set, mindset, person in one word, what would that be?
Well, if I think about what's on my mind currently or for the last 1 or 2 years, I would say hashtag intentional.
What brings you to this word?
I started to think about intention 1 or 2 years ago, when I wanted to understand more about why most of us, nearly all of us, are so bad listeners. So even if we have gone through so many conversation courses, we all know that's important to listen, but my experience, particularly also my experience with leaders all around the world, is that leaders are notoriously bad listeners, but I include myself. So I started to do some research. I read philosophy books, psychology, neuroscience, and things like that. And the missing link, which I was missing in many of the other conversation/listening books and articles and so on, was the issue of intention. I have a special idea about what intention is. Intention is this delta between the goal I have, a specific goal I have in a moment, and the action then. So what's the difference between what I have in mind, what I want to do, or how I want to do something, for example, listening or facilitating, and how am I acting later on? Because then something happens in my brain in between. And for me, intentional means to try to identify this and try to correct yourself or check this delta. So I'm trying to teach people, including myself, in being more intentional in what they're doing.
Does it also mean targeted? So that you have a clear goal where you want to go, and then you align your actions and mindset to
I
this?
think it's more about quality. What I'm thinking about is about quality, the quality of interaction with other people, the quality of how am I there as a facilitator in the room, how am I present, how do I want to be present? First of all, that's the question of intention. How do I want to be present?
Yeah.
And then check myself in the action. Am I as present as I wanted to be? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, totally. And I hear from that is also the mindset, am I ready to really serve the group and not only serve myself?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. Well said. Yeah.
So you were mentioning the foundations of your work. So is intention part of these foundations of your work, being a host and facilitator and consultant?
It hadn't been. As I just said, I just discovered intention about 1 or 2 years ago, and I'm still doing a lot of research on that and reading a lot of books. I think it will follow me for the next years to come.
So what are your foundations?
Yeah, my foundations. As I said, I just got into facilitation 25 years ago without having a clue. And then I started to work and I started to do a lot of training, of course, for myself because I had to understand what to do. And I think I got my foundations about 20 years ago when I studied with a master's with Harrison Owen, the inventor of open space technology, and then with David Cooperrider, Appreciative Inquiry, and particularly with Marvin Weisbord and Sandra Janov, who are on the one side, the developers of Future Search, but much more important, they published a seminal book. Probably many of your listeners know that, and I'm sure you know it. It's called Don't Just Do Something, Stand There.
Oh, yes,
And
it's the Bible.
Yeah, it's the Bible.
The Bible
exactly.
of facilitators.
It's the Bible of facilitators. Yeah. And what I learned from those people, particularly also from Harrison Owen and from Marvin Weisbord, is to do as little as possible, as much as necessary, and to relax and to let go. I will never forget that Harrison Owen used to say, I travel a lot, so when I've opened the marketplace in open space, I go and take a nap. I don't go and take a nap usually, but, sometimes I might do when I do open space. But my foundation is let go. Whatever happens is the only thing that could have. Let the process rule itself. Trust in the process. That's the one thing. And the other big thing I would say is love for the system and love for the participants, which is not always as easy as it's said, but really try to be empathetic with everybody who's in the room.
I totally get you, and I agree. And I think, the love for the participants is sometimes easy, sometimes difficult because they trigger so much in us. Right?
Yeah, but we know also from Marvin Weisbord that's only a projection. We are a projection. Yes. So once you have understood that, of course, it hurts sometimes. But I think with age and coming wisdom, you get much better in that. I mean, I had some bad experiences, of course, over the years. And let's say every second year I have another experience which is not so nice or fine, but you get over it.
So what's your way to handle this struggle?
Which struggle? The struggle with...
For instance, when a first-time facilitator listens to our conversation and like, oh yes, I get triggered all the time. What would be your advice to them?
Well, work on yourself. Of course, you have to see where are your successes, where are your strengths. You'll have to look for your resources. You might need some coaching. You might need to talk to people, but develop yourself and develop this awareness that it's not about you. It's about anything else, about what's wrong in the company, about something what's on people's mind, maybe back at home in private life. There are so many things, or the whole process doesn't make sense to people. It's not about you.
Yeah, I hear you. I had a conversation the other day about kindness, and it made me realize that if you feel kindness, or if you approach a session and your participants with kindness, there's no space for judgment. And if you don't judge them, then they won't trigger anything in you, because I have the impression that very often my judgment of others is actually a judgment of myself.
Could be, sure, absolutely, yeah. And I think another quality I have developed over time is to treat disturbances as interesting information. So my other important teacher, Stephen Gilligan, he always greets new information with a how interesting is that, or what's going to emerge here, what's wanting to emerge here, or with hello. So something like that. So if new information comes up in a workshop, like a disturbance, a resistance, or something like that, I really treat that as information on the system. It makes me curious. And of course, I need then also to look at my own assumptions, because this is the biggest enemy of facilitators, to come in with assumptions. Yeah, awesome.
It reminds me of just the inner work on mindset management that we have to do, and that the words we use and the labels we use will shape our mind and our inner relation to these problems. So if a challenge becomes a fantastic growth opportunity, then we will deal with it in a totally different way than as if we considered it a problem.
Yes, and what I've learned in the last weeks, because I'm studying the work of a British neuroscientist, psychologist named Nick Chater, who says the mind is flat, there is no mental depth. So he provocates a little bit. But basically what I've learned from him, we are making things up anyhow in every moment. About the system outside, I knew for 20 years that we are making up an interpretation about the system, but we are also making up our own system in every moment. So don't take yourself so serious.
Totally. And I think 80% of our actions are just caused by cognitive dissonance. Just to keep our own beliefs about ourselves alive. We interpret the environment in this way so that it fits. Yeah.
Nick Chater talks about the big interpreter we have in our mind, not as a fixed thing, but something which constantly tries to bring things into alignment with what we have thought before.
Yeah, and I think it's a very old survival instinct we have. And this combined with just the lack of capability to really listen to every word that is said, we are filling the gaps with our own inner dialogue, and then we make things up and just hear what we want to hear.
Yeah, absolutely.
I could go on and on with this conversation.
Yeah, me too. We are just warming up. Come on, let's continue.
I would like to come back to the Berlin Change Days that you started 11 years ago.
Right.
And I would be curious, first of all, maybe in the history. So how did it actually happen? How did you come up with the idea of hosting or gathering facilitators and change makers?
Well, I'll tell you the longer story because, as I said at the beginning, 1994 was my first facilitation experience in southern Kazakhstan. I will never forget that. And then, of course, I took a lot of courses. I started with doing NLP training, so made my master and things like that, took facilitation training. And then 3 years later, I thought, oh, now I know a lot. How arrogant was I? I know a lot. So let me put down my thoughts. And this was the time when the World Wide Web just started to emerge. And so I thought I need my own website. And I was more or less the first person who put up a website on change management, which was at that time mainly a collection of NLP exercises and some other stuff which I've read. So I had this website which is called Change Management Toolbook. And that was the only resource on the internet on change management. So people connected with me. I was able to create huge networks. At the beginning of the new millennium, I had like 20,000 newsletter subscribers all around the world. And I've been growing and nurturing these networks ever since. So this is the long story. Now comes the short story. In 2009, we were sitting in a co-working space in Berlin and thought, okay, what can we do to promote the co-working space a little bit? At that time, the word co-working space didn't even exist, but it was a co-working space. The first one in Berlin, the Hub, which is now Impact Hub. So we were sitting there and thinking about how can we support them? And I said, okay, why don't we organize a little conference? And within 3 months, we had organized the first Berlin Change Days. We had the idea of the name, or I had the idea of the name. And there were like 30-something people from around Europe came, mainly contacts I had. And we gathered, we exchanged knowledge, we had some little workshops, and that was the first time. So there was no big concept or vision or something like that behind, as some people might think. It was just, okay, let's do it. And yeah, people liked it. It was good. So I thought, why not repeat it? So in the next year, there were about 50 participants. The year after, there were like 70, 80 participants, then 100. And I just checked the numbers some days ago. In year 5, we had the number at which we are now, which is about 150.
And I read in one of your articles that the 150 you perceive as a sweet spot because it's small enough to keep the connection and the space, but large enough to have enough variety.
Yeah, right. I mean, 150 is that magical number which has been around for a long time. Probably you remember that the company Gore, which produces this kind of fabrics, Gore-Tex and so on, had the principle, and I'm not quite sure whether they still have it, but they had the principle that whenever one specific site grew bigger than 150 people, they would open another one. So 150 has a good variety, the necessary requisite variety, but it's also still intimate enough. You can put the people into one room. Not everybody will meet everybody within 3 days, but a lot of people have the possibility to interact. Yeah. So that's why I think 150 is a good number. We try to keep it at that number. Yeah.
Okay, makes sense. So what was your biggest learning after 11 years of Berlin Change Days?
Well, a lot of learnings, and maybe if I might, Miriam, I would like to talk about the principles which emerged over time. So we didn't develop them; they weren't written down, but they came like the 10 Commandments from God. No, but there were suddenly they were there. Maybe I don't need to mention all of them, but I think that's quite important, because what the biggest learning for me was probably it's so important to treat people as equals, particularly if you are in a professional setting. I get so much upset at other conferences if they are the stars, the facilitators. They just fly in, they show 100 slides, and then they disappear, not before they have mentioned that everybody should buy their books and
do I hear some sarcasm?
Register for their courses. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So I think what's really special about the Berlin Change is we don't have that, and we make really sure that, I mean, of course, people should promote themselves, but in a humble way, and everybody has the same chance, and participants have the same chance to promote themselves as facilitators. So have people on an eye level is very important. So that's number one. The second one is make sure that there is a possibility for connecting and for learning together. So make sure that people have time to breathe and to digest. So this year we even introduced a room which we called the incubator, where people just could come, relax, discuss with other people, reflect, make some artwork and things like that. So
that was amazing.
Yeah. You were there, of course. Yeah. That was great, yeah. And well hosted. It was not just a room, it was hosted by two wonderful people.
Yeah, which made all the difference. I think the room wouldn't have had the impact and triggered so much creativity and co-creation without hosting it or holding the space. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe the third one, which I want to mention, that this is very important for me, is emotions are part of the learning journey. And we intentionally, here's the word again, intentionally, we try to create emotional experiences. I remember the biggest emotional experience we had 4 years ago when we had an opera singer who's also a coach.
Oh, wow.
And we ended the Berlin Change Days with everybody, 100 people in the room singing together the Ode an die Freude from Ludwig van Beethoven. That was a very magical moment. And whoever was there 4 years ago still remembers that.
Beautiful. To what extent do you think does an event needs a different design depending on whether you have facilitators joining or people from the corporate world?
Well, first of all, every event needs their design. That's pretty simple, unless you do open space technology, which has the same design and which kind of works in most cases. But apart from that, every event is different, and every workshop I facilitate is different. So I wouldn't narrow it down to these two groups, to corporate event or facilitator event. But as you wanted to talk about how to host facilitators, I think in general it's easier to host facilitators. For a long time I thought it's more difficult, but meanwhile I came to the conclusion it's much easier if you do it in the right way, because they are all pros. They all know things, they know how workshops work, They come, particularly if they come to learn and participate and to network, so they come already with the right motivation. And if you treat them as equals and not with arrogance, but in a humble way, they are the most thankful and appreciative folks you could imagine. I think what you can do is you can push those people right away into experiences. But then again, on the other side, this is what I do anyhow. I start my workshops generally with quite a strong and emotional experience.
Hi, this is Andrew. I'm a facilitator and head of customer success at Session Lab, the dynamic workshop planner tool. More than 30,000 facilitators, trainers, and coaches use our workshop planner tool and save time and effort in the design process. So, how do they do it? Our drag and drop agenda builder makes it easy to transform your ideas into high-quality workshops, and the timing of your agenda automatically updates when you make changes. You can collaborate in real time with your colleagues and easily share professional-looking printouts with your clients. And if you need inspiration, you can check out our library of more than 500 activities and exercises and simply drag the ones you need right into your workshop agenda. So check out Session Lab to save time and effort in your workshop design process. And now get your first 2 months of Session Lab Pro absolutely free at sessionlab.com/workshopswork.
How do you find the balance? Because emotions can also go over the top, and we talked about that in our pre-record conversation, of that it can become too emotional for some participants. How do you control that? And can you actually?
No, of course you can control it to a certain extent if you are smart in the design of the workshop. You know, Miriam, I need to tell you that actually my hidden passion and the profession I would love to follow if I had another chance would be opera directors. I would like to direct operas. So a little bit I try to bring that into my workshops. And I remember a long time ago, like 15 years ago, I had a workshop where I intentionally made people cry at the end. So there was a little bit of opera. I don't do that so often anymore, but I knew at that point I had like the sorcerer's broom in my hand, Zauberlehrling, So I think you can design it. And to your question, whether it's too much or not, I mean, you're referring to the Berlin Change Days of 2018, where it was very emotional. It was very self-reflective. People were really pushed to their edges, out of their comfort zone by the great Mary Alice Arthur, who's one of the most magical facilitators I know. So people were really pushed out of their comfort zones. And for some people, it was too much. I think it's important to, and here we come to a very important quality of a facilitator, is that you hold the container. You make sure that people at the end feel it's a safe space. With a number of 150, you probably will exclude a few, but make sure that you include 95% of the people. That's all I can say. And of course, we don't create the emotions just for the sake of emotions, because I love seeing people cry or laugh. Although I love seeing people cry and laugh, but it's about, it reinforces the learning experience.
Totally. Would you adjust the design depending on how you feel the group? So how often do you redesign the flow of such a 2-day conference, or won't you?
Well, in smaller workshops, when we talk workshops with 20, 30, 40 people, I'm adjusting all the time. In a 2 days conference, it's more difficult. Just logistically, it's more difficult, particularly in the Berlin Change Days. We have the many people who host workshops, facilitate workshops. So it's rather minor adjustments. And we had them, of course. We had this wonderful thing also, that was, I think, 3 years ago, when people suddenly, the whole gender issue came up. There was a group of male facilitators and no woman at the stage and things like that. And the topic was power anyhow of this Berlin Change Day. So we had a wonderful, we adjusted and had a wonderful discussion. And that's a good thing. Coming back to your question, how do you host facilitators? I mean, the good thing is that facilitators might be outspoken. They might be critical. They might raise a point earlier than other people. But it comes from their own experiences, comes from their wisdom, and there is always some truth in what they're saying. The other thing is, however, if you have big groups of facilitators, usually the system regulates it by itself. So you don't have so much those people who take too much room. You have some from time to time who take a lot of space, but within a big group, it doesn't matter so much.
Interesting. It's like you just read my mind, because this was the question that came up, where I wondered to what extent you run into the risk or the danger to have all these outspoken, highly experienced facilitators in a room. And I can imagine that there are a few who feel the urge of jumping in and co-facilitating or suggesting small tweaks that might be valid or invalid, but they can disrupt the entire planning of the conference. Have you experienced that, and how would you deal with it?
I have experienced that. Interesting enough, not so much in big conferences, rather more in smaller workshops. And I think I'm guilty as well. I think I have tried to co-facilitate in other workshops as well, or offered my help. So I know exactly what I'm talking about. It happens. It doesn't happen as often as I would expect, but it happens. And again, first of all, I would take it as a piece of information that's interesting. And this person has something to say. It very, very rarely happened to me that it was so intrusive that I had to intervene and to do something about that. And then you usually would take the colleague aside and would talk with them and ask them what's important for them and tell them what's important for you. So exchange a little bit about purpose. But in general, I would say, yeah, okay, it's a piece of information, and sometimes it might be even valuable. So again, check your own assumptions, check your plan, be true to yourself. Don't fight for your plans and your systems just because you had made them. Of course, I mean, you should be self-confident and you should check your assumptions.
Sounds to me as if it's also to reflect on the ego, how much of the resistance is actually just the ego. Hey, it's me, the facilitator, so who are you to disrupt my plan? And to what extent it's really genuine feedback that we can take into account.
Yeah, absolutely. And ego is, again, the big enemy of the facilitator. Quite interesting. I listened to one of your shows, the one with Pam Hamilton recently. And I remember the conversation you had about extrovertism versus introvertism, and where I think Pam said that, usually facilitators would be more extroverts. I'm not quite sure. In my opinion, probably the better facilitators are introverts who develop their extroversion a little bit. I developed that way. I was rather an introvert who had to work on my extroversion side than the other way around, because extroverts very often put their ego quite into the front, and that might disturb the group.
Or at least they're more outspoken and they need and take more space. So absolutely. I like to reflect in the way that, do you speak to think or think to speak? And then if you're an extrovert, I think extroverts are more prone to speak to think. And then immediately they take more space and it becomes about them, but less about the group.
Exactly. Yeah.
I wrote down this quote, ego is the big enemy of facilitation. I love that. I have to print it. I'd like to come back to the conversation about taking space as a facilitator or participant. And I wonder, and maybe it's a little bit provocative, but sometimes I like provocative questions. As a facilitator, when we are in charge of creating psychological safety, of holding the container, of making it all about the group, so to serve the group, I wonder to what extent facilitators who then switch roles and become participants, whether they are so aware that now it's all about them and they might feel so comfortable in this role to let go of control that this could impact the facilitation or even make the facilitation of the entire event or workshop more difficult. Have you any experience or thoughts on that?
Yeah, again, as I said, I think my experience changed over the last 20 years. I have been facilitating facilitators quite for a while. I've also done a lot of train the trainers courses and things like that. And I think it was also a mirror of my own self-confidence. So if I'm confident that I'm able to hold the container and provide an experience for all participants, it kind of transmits. And I don't know, maybe facilitators have become more aware and more mindful over time. And again, I wouldn't say that there are no incidences from time to time that people, as you say, need to have this control over what's happening. But I think it's all about creating the right container. And as I said already, what I usually do is at the beginning of workshops or the Berlin Change Days, to have people going through quite a strong experience at the beginning, which shows them, okay, this is a special space here. So you're entering a space where you will be pushed out of your comfort zone. Be aware of what that means. For example, in my courses on intentional listening, the first thing what participants experience is that they are blindfolded even before they enter the training room. So they're blindfolded and totally pushed out of their comfort zone. And I think this kind of experiences, if you create them carefully and of course frame them well with the words you say, creates the container which is necessary that people open up and are mindful in their interaction with other participants. Yeah. There is no panacea, Miriam, of course. You will always have experiences, disturbing experiences, but if you have the right attitude and mindset, humbleness, self-confidence, you will be able to hold in the container.
Yeah. What would be your favorite exercise to push your participants out of their comfort zone, through that create this safe container?
Well, there is one which I really love. It's very simple. I have done it with big groups, but I usually do it rather with smaller groups. So it's a trust building exercise. And it works in the way that, depending on the size of the group, I break them up into groups of 6, 7, 8, maximum 8 participants. They stand in a circle. I demoed the exercise before. It's good when I have a co-facilitator, but it works also without. So those people, the participants, stand in a circle of 6 to 8 people, and then one of the participants goes into the middle, and the other participants ask questions. And it could be very simple questions like, what's your favorite food or color or things like that, but open questions. But I encourage participants to go deeper, to ask questions like, what do you fear, what are your strengths, what do you love, what do people love about you, and things like that. And through demoing it before, it usually works. It's always a mixture, but it's quite interesting because it's for people, first of all, to dare to ask questions, and for the people in the middle to dare to answer. And it's also to trust yourself to ask the question, to trust that this is a safe place. People in the middle to trust that this is a safe place and I can give answers. And this is usually quite a transformative experience if it is done right. So everybody has like 3 to 4 minutes. I usually time that so that all people have the same experience. I try to be in one of the circles if it's a smaller group size altogether. But as I said, I've also done it without co-facilitators. So, and then of course there's a debrief after that, which is very important. Yes. Because people then start to talk about their experience and whether it was easy or not to create trust or to experience trust. And usually after that, I go into more the foundational aspects of trust. I use a model by a guy called David Meister, who has established a trust equation, which I think is quite insightful. So I continue then talking about trust. And so that is usually quite a turning point in many of my workshops. And we do that in companies, in big companies. So it's not just something we do with facilitators, but we do that with just normal employees in companies, and they enjoy it a lot.
Interesting. And I can imagine that if you do this in the context of, for instance, the Berlin Change Days, with only facilitators who are used to these kind of exercises and maybe who long also to open up and to have this community where there can be participants, that they would be more happy to really open up and jump into this experience, whether in a corporate space, maybe questions will rather stay at the surface in the beginning. Did you observe that?
That's not my experience. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure about the first part of what you're saying, but my experience is when properly introduced, when demoed, if I do it with a co-facilitator, very often I ask the co-facilitator to take me as the guinea pig and ask me, and I'm then showing my openness and my vulnerability right away from the beginning. It works. I mean, it has to be framed well, and people, even what means even, particularly in companies, people really are longing, are craving for that opportunity to open up if they feel this is a safe space, this is a container.
So what would be the best way to mess this exercise up? Because you said if it's introduced in the right way, so what would be the worst way to introduce it or to launch this kind of exercise?
First of all, not to make sure that people have the feeling that this is a safe space, and I don't do that exercise at the very beginning. So usually we're already together for half a day or something like that. So I have done some pre-work in letting people feel that this is a safe space with other exercises. But also, of course, if it stays on the surface, I would demo it and just ask, what's your favorite food? What's your favorite color? What's the name of your pet? And things like that. Then, of course, it stays on the surface. And on the other side, of course, also to see if somebody is very hesitant to be careful with some of the questions. But that's not such a major concern, because I always say people, they can also pass. They don't need to answer the question if it's too much.
And I can imagine that you can perfectly actually adjust it to very specific questions. So for instance, you mentioned that you would do it only after half a day of workshopping. And then it's maybe a nice way to just question and answer about what the group has worked on and discussed in the first part of the day. So you give it a topic where you throw questions at the person in the middle that are related to actually the subject that the workshop is about.
Yeah, about the experience, for example, in the company, if it's about collaboration. So, very often then the other participants ask questions which are related to their work experience, which is interesting.
Awesome. Makes total sense. You mentioned before that the role of control, when we talked about facilitators being the participants. And this brought to my mind that as facilitators, there are only two things we can control anyway. It's the process and it's ourselves. And I think that many facilitators, well, I can only speak for myself, but in normal life, I would consider myself almost an introvert. But if I'm in charge of the process and if I have control, if I know what my role is, I become an extrovert and quite outspoken and confident. And I think I can imagine that giving up control in a workshop with facilitators can be a struggle for them. So would you advise to give out more information about the process and the agenda and the design and the why if you face a group of facilitators as participants? Or would you maybe just ignore this inner desire for control that many facilitators might have?
I'm not sure, Miriam. I'm not sure whether whether I subscribe to your assumption, because you have control freaks everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
You have control freaks in companies and you have them among facilitators. I'm not quite sure whether in general facilitators have a stronger urge to control. Certainly there are, and I include myself. I'm a control freak, and I've learned to deal with it, and
Mm-hmm.
I've learned to let go. The Berlin Change Days was a nice experience in that, but that's another story about my
I
own.
admired that. I'll come to this in a second.
We can come to that later on. I don't want to go away from your question. So I think it's situation specific. And yeah, as I said before, if you feel that there are people who need to control, then see what information it should give you and talk to them. But I wouldn't adjust my design specifically if I'm dealing with facilitators. I mean, the one thing I can repeat, and maybe I said that, I respect them. There are colleagues there maybe even better than I. So humbleness is, I think, the most important quality you need when you deal with facilitators.
Awesome. Thank you for underlining this again. And when you say that you're a control freak, and I observed that during the Berlin Change Days, and I was in full awe to see that you were the host, but you did not interfere in the facilitation. So
I need
Yes?
to explain a little bit about the different roles we have, because we have different roles at the Berlin Change Days. We have what I would probably call the super host, which I had been over the last years. Then we have head facilitators. That's the people who design the program and hold it together and facilitate the elements in between small workshops. And then we have the facilitators who do the small workshops. And then, of course, we have a hosting team, which is the Orga team. So when we started 11 years ago, I was having a lot of different roles. I was facilitating and keynoting and probably do a small workshop and things like that. But that was only for a few years. Then I withdrew more and more to the superhost role, which means that I facilitated all the other teams. And I usually made the decision who are the head facilitators. That was my privilege. And I still remember in the first years I was quite anxious and nervous, and that's the same when I started to apply open space technology. I was anxious and nervous to let go, and I was running around like crazy. And fortunately, then I had people who did all the backbone work, the admin work, and so perfectly, so I could trust them. I was able to collect a team of people who were holding the space together. So with time, I just had the experience. It runs without major interventions from my side, and I can really enjoy the experience. So that was a learning effect. And I'm looking forward to the next stage where I don't have a role at all, maybe only a participant. And I'm even considering, maybe not next year, but I'm considering some time to come that I'm not there. I'll let the thing run by itself. That would be interesting.
Yes, very interesting.
So it's really a matter of maturing, and I really enjoy that.
And
finally,
trusting
61.
that the participant in the process just works. Yeah,
absolutely.
How would you select the head facilitators then?
A very simple rule. I need to know them. I need to see them facilitating somewhere. They should have been at the Berlin Change Days before, usually, because it's such a special event that if you haven't been there, you can't imagine what it is. So, yeah. And it should be a good mixture. After the incident some years ago where we only had male team at stage, I make sure that there's a gender balance. I try to include people of color, which doesn't always work. Yeah, that's the principle.
Okay, so to really have diversity.
Yeah.
Awesome. What do you think makes a workshop fail?
That's an interesting question. Again, you ask a good question, Miriam.
Thank you.
First of all, question is, what's failure? Yeah. I mean, what's failure, and can workshops fail at all? I mean, if we agree to Harrison Owen's statement that whatever happens is the only thing that could have. I mean, there is no failure of a workshop. There's just feedback. There's just information. And of course, sometimes as a facilitator, you have the feeling that something went wrong. Yeah. And the easy answer is, of course, that it's only the facilitator who can make the workshop fail, because he or she doesn't adjust well to the system, does not let go of their story. And that's certainly a recipe for failure. Obviously, lack of preparation and lack of aligning expectations. But even then, I remember I had a wonderful workshop. Oh, can I tell a little story of a workshop? Do we still have the time? Okay, so I had a workshop with an NGO which runs international projects last year. And in the preparation, it became already difficult because they trashed my whole agenda and they wanted to do it very differently. So they wanted to discuss all issues in a big group of 40 people, develop the strategy. And I saw it won't work. It's not possible to work. But at the end, I said, okay, that's your agenda, because I knew it wouldn't work and I wouldn't adjust. And then I was in a different city the day before and I missed my plane because there was a hurricane in Amsterdam and I couldn't get the plane. So I couldn't be in time for the workshop opening. That was fantastic. Fortunately, I had an intern, a young facilitator who was there already. And so I phoned her overnight and say, yeah, you just open the workshop and let's see what happens. And then I arrived only half a day late into a 3 days workshop. So I already had let go. But then I was gently able to steer and to see, okay, is there a point where the clients, the participants see, yeah, it would be nice maybe to change, and it worked very smoothly and we achieved all the results at the end. And in Germany we say, die haben aus meiner Hand gefressen, so I could hand feed them then. Yeah.
Nice. Thank you for the story. I think that's one of the nightmares of many facilitators. What if you arrive late to your own workshop?
Well, that was the only time in my life, but also half a day, and I didn't sleep the whole night. That was the additional thing.
I bet, yeah. So just out of curiosity, as a very last question, when you said that you also train facilitators, so train the trainers, what is the very first thing that you want them to learn?
To be honest with themselves and to develop a sense of looking at themselves, of course, with appreciation, but also with a certain openness and, understand their bright sides and their dark sides and how they can use them for the benefit of the client.
Awesome. Is there anything that you wanted to share but didn't find the space in our conversation?
No, I think we talked a lot of different things. I really enjoyed the conversation. Yeah. So what I just want to give to the listeners is don't stop learning. Don't stop questioning yourself. Read a lot, all different kinds of things, and digest what you're reading, and then try new things the next time.
Yeah. Thank you. And you mentioned so many different resources and food for thought and food for reading. I will put it in the show notes.
Yeah. Don't forget my own podcast.
Yes.
Of course, which is the Days of Change podcast, which is also like yours, Conversations with Facilitators. So, but a little bit different than yours. Yours is focusing on facilitation, which I really appreciate and admire because it's such a great resource to really go systematically through different aspects of facilitation. The Days of Change podcast is on different aspects of change, personal and systemic and things like that.
Awesome. I'll definitely put it in the show notes.
Thank you.
And encourage everyone to listen to it, to learn about change. If someone wants to reach out to you or work with you or join the Berlin Change Days, how can they get in touch?
Different ways. First of all, Google my name, Holger Nauheimer. Second of all, go to either berlinchangedays.com or changedays.com. There you also will find the podcast. To my personal website, which is hnauheimer.net. But again, you'll find that. And of course, if people are more interested, if I can do a little bit of self-promotion,
please,
more interested in my work on intention, I'll invite for the moment, the German crowd, and I'm sure there is a big German crowd listening to you, to come to my workshop on intentional listening, which starts in March and April, which is a deep dive into a deep listening experience. I promise you won't regret it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing.
My LinkedIn profile, because I blog a lot on LinkedIn.
Of course. I won't forget that. Thank you so much for taking the time, Holger, and for sharing your incredible expertise in hosting facilitators, but also just hosting and facilitating workshops. I learned a lot.
Thank you so much, Miriam. I really enjoyed to be on the other side and being the interviewed person. You have wonderful questions. You are a great host. Please keep going. You are adding a lot of value to our profession. So thanks for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for staying tuned and listening to the show. I appreciate your attention as I know how busy you are. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and engage by sharing your comments and thoughts, and visit workshops.work to download the one-page summary. I'm looking forward to seeing you back at the next episode, and I wish you a fruitful day.